Hello guys, David Vose here. What a beautiful day we're having. Got a lot of clouds up in the sky, but it's like in the 50s, lower 50s. I was told that it's snowing, blizzarding in Virginia, over there in Carolina area. Crazy. I was like, well, wait a minute, they don't get snow over there normally, do they? I was like, nope, but they sure have had the weather this time. And here in the mountains of the Rocky Mountains, I'm right on the Continental Divide. I am within just a 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 miles. I don't know the exact spot where they claim the Continental Divide, which is the crest of the Rocky Mountains. It goes all the way down through America and Mexico, but almost 8,000 feet, and we haven't had any snow this year. And I'm looking at the weather app, and it shows the rest of the week, as far as I can see into the future, next week or two, is going to be up in the 50s and 60s. Now, that may sound cool to some of you guys down there in the Bahamas, but up here at 8,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains, in northern America, in the midst of winter, with no snow, only one time have we had snow, about an inch or two, and it melted right off in one day. It's pretty weird. I sometimes get the feeling, a slight, odd, weird wondering, if what they're saying about the magnetic North Pole, they're claiming a lot of things. I don't even know what to believe, whether I believe anything they say, but they claim that the magnetic North Pole is moving towards Russia. For the last, I don't know how many years, more than like 20 or some years. And it's now moving over 50, 55, 60 miles not an hour, but per year. 50 miles per year. So it's moved hundreds of miles over the last several years, last 10 or 20, 30 years. I don't know how long. And then they say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with the actual North Pole. It hasn't moved. You'd have to imagine that if the North Pole did move, what I'm assuming is the point in the middle of that top, that wobble, and that wobble creates the seasons. And of course, it creates the seasons, particularly in the north, in the winter, is cold, where it's warmer in the southern regions. But if that actual pole moved, wouldn't stop the seasons, because there'd still be a pole and there'd still be a wobble. Theoretically, I mean, we'll mention the science here in a second. It would say, no, that's not true. But just for a second, forgetting about one very critical part of science here. But if the pole moved and we're still doing the wobble at the same rate, but the wobble is now moved, the center of the wobble is now moved a little bit. Well, that would mean then that what was always north would now have changed a little bit for some locations in that area that was originally called north. Anything above the equator now, see, which was north, would be slightly different, because literally what we're saying is the equator, or that pole, both poles would, if the North Pole's going towards Russia, then the southern pole would be going, in the opposite direction. And so it might mean then that, say, Australia is either closer or further away from the now imaginary equator, which is only there because that's the center around the peripheral that's going around the imaginary pole. I don't know if you're going to be able to follow this. So take a ball and spin it on your finger. Okay, now that place where the finger touches the basketball is the southern pole. Now, let's say that it starts losing a little speed and it begins to wobble. It's starting to slow down, and so it's not going around real fast, and the North Pole's not straight up and down, but it's a little slower, and it's starting to wobble. Well, now the North Pole is in the middle of the wobble at the top of the basketball. And we can imagine that that wobble is based on how fast that thing's going around. And perhaps over millions of years, the wobble gets more of a wobble. And eventually the wobble just stops wobbling and it sort of falls over or something. Now, if that's the case, there's no more wobble, there's no more spin. Obviously, that's not what's happened over the period of history where they claim that this thing flipped on its axis every 11,000 years or whatever they're saying. So if the speed of this wobble is slowing down at such a rate that millions of years could go by and you wouldn't even hardly notice any difference, then we don't have to think about that. Nothing's going to change in the next 100 years if that's the case. But the wobble could be wobbling because of the fact that it's spinning at this particular speed. And that could probably be because everything, we've talked about this, everything in the universe is like a vortice. So the galaxy supposedly is a vortice going around and around, all the stars are swirling around, and each solar system is a smaller vortice. Now you can think of it as a big hurricane, as a big vortice spinning around, but it spins off tornadoes off of its peripheral, and the tornadoes go through and do almost as much damage, but they're much smaller vortices. And then the little tornadoes will throw off little twisters, and they'll throw off little other smaller things, and this goes all the way down to all the cells in your body, right? They're all little vortices spinning off of some greater vortice. So anyway, back to the Earth. It's spinning like caught in something's vortice, perhaps the sun, which is caught in the vortice of the star Sirius or something, which is probably caught in a tunnel vortice. That is what they're claiming, although we don't know if there even is an Orion arm to the galaxy, because now we know that they couldn't have possibly have seen that. It's too far away. We're a little speck of dust in the middle of a galaxy. There's no way we could look out and see the arms of our galaxy. But just going by things that we've already heard, we're imagining that this vortice is like an arm, like a river. But it's not just a flowing river out, spinning around, but it's like a vortice. Anyway, I don't know if you could even follow what I'm saying, but forget all of that anyway. The point is that for whatever reason, the Earth is spinning. And the North Pole has a wobble. If the North Pole has a wobble, and that wobble was to move to the right or to the left, right? If something on our planet that we call the eastern part, like Asia, if that pole at the top of the basketball is moving closer to Asia, then the wobble doesn't necessarily change. We're still going to get the same seasons, but it might mean that there is someplace around the equator that is moved out of that location of the equator or the equatorial region. And now the equatorial region is moving up on that side and down on the other, which would make sense because of the fact that I have noticed over the last, in my lifetime, since I was about, I don't know how old I was, 25 or 30 years old or whatever, when Mount St. Helens went off. And ever since that time, I noticed in Idaho, we didn't get as much snow. And it's been warming up. Now, everything goes through cycles. And so it's not the same every year. There are years in Idaho where they get some snow. But I don't think they've ever gotten the snowfalls in Wyoming and Idaho and Colorado and places that they used to get 20, 30 years ago. I just don't think it's like about dropped in half, if or more. Every year we would get snow in deer season, the end of September, something like that. Most times now, out west here, even in the Rocky Mountains, we don't even get snow until Christmas. Sometimes we do, but a lot of times we don't. Not even, it's like, it's crazy. And you say, well, the earth is warming up. That's why. It's warmer now. Well, it is seem to be warmer here. But I've also noticed that the temperatures get colder up in the northeast, Wisconsin and New England area. They've had very cold temperatures. Over the last 20-some years, it seems like they've been getting colder temperatures. And I hear a lot of reports about London, Europe, and that area, that they're getting colder in Russia. Well, that's what they claim is going on here with the magnetic North Pole, is moving towards Russia, which would mean that north, which used to be in Banff Island, up around the Bay of Banff or whatever up in Canada, that big, like, almost looks like the Gulf of America. They used to call the Gulf of Mexico, but there's like a gulf there in Canada, like facing Greenland. And that gulf, right up above that little gulf, at the top of that, there's a little island, Banff Island. By the way, that's where, when you see pictures of Mars, you're looking at Banff Island. I think it's called Banff or something. There's a Mars rover station there. It's desolate like the moon, right? And so when they say they're taking pictures of the moon or Mars, they're taking pictures on site on the Earth somewhere. There's another station in Utah. So I don't know if some of the pictures you're getting from Mars or the moon or whatever is from, Utah, or it's from Banff. But anyway, where the coldest region of the world would be if that magnetic North Pole was, or if the North Pole itself was there just above Canada, then that would be the coldest spot on the Earth in the winter. But if that spot's moved closer to Russia now, just about to hit the shores of Russia, then the coldest place is going to have moved several hundred miles over to Russia. And this means that on this side, right, because we're on the other side from Russia, in Alaska and Canada, it's going to be warmer. I know it wouldn't be a lot in the first few years if it only moved 50 miles. But then if it moved 100 or 200 miles, you'd start noticing it down here in New Mexico. You'd start noticing it. However, here's the thing. How could the pole have moved and they didn't notice it? Because they claim that the compasses still work the same way they always did. But if magnetic North Poles moved, then it would seem that the compass would not be reading the same location as it used to. And I have heard testimony that airplane pilots and scientists have said that it is moving. But you'd think if it was moving, they would make a public declaration and they would tell everybody it's been moving. So I don't care where the actual pole is, and they claim, the pole's still in the same spot. It's a magnetic pole that's moved. But it's an invisible thing either way. There's no actual pole running through the Earth. So how they can say that there's an actual pole, but the magnetic pole is something different, I don't know that either. Although, because, they could say, it's the energies. It's these magnetic energies. And you can't see them, but they're moving. But the pole's still there. So what they're saying is the wobble is still in the same location. Now, why would it be? Why wouldn't, if the magnetic poles moved, why wouldn't the wobble itself move? Or at least be motivated to move a little or wobble differently if there's some magnetic force pulling it in some other direction? None of this makes any sense. And since I have seen people say pretty authoritative sources say, oh, yes, the magnetic pole's moving, and yes, the compass measurements are moving. So real estate and, GPS is changing, and I've heard that. But it's like, where's Tyson DeGrasse coming out and saying, oh, yes, it's moved? Well, maybe they didn't tell him yet, right? Because he's just like the mouthpiece. And so the scientists don't want to tell us that it's moving. Maybe because it falls into their scheme, it plays into their scheme, which they want us to believe that the Earth is warming up. There's global warming. Well, it would be warming up in areas that are now tilting towards the equator where they were further north. But in another part of the Earth, like in Russia, it would be colder. So take a look at this. Now, this is an AI overview. Now, remember, before we read this, remember what I said when I first started, that it's snowing in Virginia, in the Carolinas, blizzarding, but no snow here in the western part of the United States. The eastern part of the United States is very cold. Notice that the eastern part of the United States is closer to the Atlantic and to Europe and Russia. Okay. Now, it says here, while the overall global trend is warming due to climate change, some regions, like parts of Russia and Europe, can experience colder periods due to natural climate variations like the polar vortex shifts. Didn't we just say that the pole spins and creates a vortice or a vortex? They're very similar words, pretty much mean the same thing. So we have a variation in the polar vortex. That's the vortice, right? And it's shifting. And so they're saying it, but you're just go, oh, well, I don't know what they're saying because I don't understand English or something, whatever. Which can bring colder air from the Arctic. But the long-term trend is still towards warmer temperatures, although we haven't seen it in that area, right? But over here in America, in the western part of the United States, oh, yeah, it's warmer. Probably off the coast of California out there in the water, maybe in that area would even be warmer. Maybe it's shifted. Maybe the spot that's the warmest or getting the warmest is just off of California to the west. I don't know. You guys up there in Hawaii can tell me if you've noticed any differences. But anyway, I don't know. I haven't looked at the globe to see exactly what would be due. We'll look at that in a second. Due south and on the backside or the opposite direction of the polar magnetic pole going towards Russia. So we'll see where that's going, and we'll go in the opposite direction. It should be warmer on that side, and we'll take a look at that. Well, we've already said that's what's happening, because Russia's definitely on the other side of the earth from us. China, they always say, is on the other side of the earth from us. Well, so China's probably getting a little colder, but they wouldn't notice it because they're kind of down there in the equator area anyway. But Russia would notice it because they were very close to the Arctic, and now they're closer. But our Alaska and Canada's further away than it was, several hundred miles further away from the Arctic now. So Canada and the United States would be getting a little warmer, and that's what seems to be happening. And as we can show here, Russia seems to be, and Europe, getting a little colder. But they can't figure this out. So while there may be occasional colder spells, it doesn't mean Russia and Europe are permanently becoming colder overall. But why are we talking about this? Why would we even bring this up? It's not like when I asked a question, they could have inferred from my question that I thought that there was a polar shift. I mean, what did I ask? I said, Russia and Europe becoming colder? Question mark. I didn't say anything about no polar vortex. But that's what, it's like they read my mind. Oh, okay. They read minds now. I think the AI is literally being run by our subconscious minds. And I guarantee there's no other way. They cannot create consciousness. If they can create consciousness, if these scientists can create virtual consciousness, awareness in a computer self-awareness, then they are now God. And that would mean there is no divine being, right? If what we are calling the divine being that created everything is just some stupid idiot named Elon and his brother Daryl and his other brother Daryl, I don't think that I'm going to be able to reconcile this information. But they could have figured out how to catch radio waves from antennas, and maybe your thought waves are actual waves just like any other radio wave, and they can catch them in an antenna and then use your brain, all of our subconscious minds, for computational resources. So, key points to remember. They always get you the key points. It's almost like they're trying to indoctrinate us. Now, class, this is what it means. I just asked a freaking question. I didn't need your pretentious little, now, these are the key points, class. We're going to grade you on this. It's like, what? So, climate change is still happening. We must reiterate that. Regardless of what you're seeing in the world and all the facts, climate change is still happening. Even when occasional cold snaps. But why are you even saying that these supposed cold snaps are occasional? Why wouldn't we have just assumed that? Why did you have to tell us that? Unless, for some reason, you're contradicting the actual facts. I'm going to take a little look and see just what the trend is up there in Russia, because I seem to remember last year and the year before and the year before that, it was colder in Europe and in the eastern part of our country and Russia. I have noticed a long standing trend. And so we'll look that up to see if I'm right. But then it talks about Arctic amplification. The Arctic is warming faster than other regions. Well, yeah, the place that used to be solid ice, which was originally the pole, would now be melting because it's moving. But areas in Russia are getting colder and there's ice forming up there. But they might not draw that on the map because it's over land, right? Used to be out in the ocean. Just like the Antarctic there's landmass there. But the cold area doesn't only freeze on the land, it freezes in the ocean, and this is what we call icebergs. And they can melt if the Earth shifts slowly. Maybe they don't want us to know that we're shifting slowly on the axis. And one other point that I might add here is if that is happening, if we can demonstrate that today, then how do we know that it doesn't reach a certain point and just go boop, flip? Like the rest of the way just kind of flips because it reaches some equilibrium or something. That's something we can only guess at, but records in the layers of the strata of Earth where they can look at it like tree rings and the Earth strata, they seem to see various changes in the magnetic field of the Earth or whatever that they've supposedly figured out with their little smart scientists. And they've said that there has been polar shifts from time to time. And I heard once it was like every 11,000 years. I would suppose that it might be 12,000 because that would be what I am told is the astrological age. You would go 12,000 years and then flip, and then another 12,000 years and flip. It's the actual 24,000 year period. So I wrote, is northern Russia getting colder? And I've worded this a couple of different ways, and they just keep saying no. According to current climate data, northern Russia is not getting colder in winter. In fact, it's generally experiencing warming trends, with Arctic regions warming at a faster rate than the global average, meaning winters are becoming milder in most parts of northern Russia. So I looked that up in several different places to see if maybe they were lying, but it seems that they're going to stick to their story. And they're saying, no, it's getting warmer in Russia. So that wouldn't fit my paradigm, because it doesn't seem to be getting any colder in America either, except for over there in the Northeast. So I thought, now, wait a minute. What if we asked that question a little bit differently? But before we do that, I'm just going to read you this, because remember I was telling you that since Mount St. Helens, it seems like up in Idaho, they haven't had nearly the snow anywhere in the western part of the United States, we've had decreased snow levels, way, way, way decreased, like half or less. And this says satellite measurements for the last 30 years, since about 1980, that's exactly when I saw it happen, the year that Mount St. Helens blew, showed that snow cover considerably decreased in the northern hemisphere in spring and summer. In the western regions of European Russia, Transbaikalia, and Nachukik region, there was a tendency for a decrease in snow depth. So evidently this decrease in the snow depth is happening not only in America, in Canada, and United States, but also in Russia and Europe. So that doesn't seem to fit my theory, but hold on. The main reason for such a change in recent decades was the surface air temperature. Maybe there was an increase of volcanoes. I don't know. I know from the moment Mount St. Helens went off, we had ash all over Idaho. In Bonners Ferry, Idaho, there was ash on the ground. Hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Mount St. Helens in Washington. But ever since then, and that year we didn't get any snow, and then several years after that, we didn't get any snow hardly at all. And then the snow started coming back, but it was like it didn't come until December. And I don't know what's going on up there recently, but I can tell you there's very little snow anywhere I've been. But how about what if the Earth has been warming up and would have warmed up everywhere, and that's a natural phenomenon? Maybe there is some kind of global warming. However, maybe, I want to look into the idea, is Russia getting warmer slower than the rest of the world's getting warmer? Is it getting warmer in Russia, but not as warm as it's getting in America? Then you would have another scenario. You'd have the idea that, yeah, in the last 30 years, everything has been getting warmer, but there's still this other phenomenon that the pole has changed, and it's even getting warmer in America, in the western part of America, and colder in their region. So let me take a little look at that. Look at this, what I found. Average annual global surface temperature, both land and sea, increased by 0.179 degrees in Celsius, or 0.322 degrees Fahrenheit, every decade from 1976 to 2020. 2020, this is Barbara Walters. While temperatures over land increased by 0.295 Celsius and 0.531 Fahrenheit, he said. Russia's territory, however, has been warming almost twice as fast as land globally, at 0.51 Celsius and 0.91 Fahrenheit per decade. So it's been going almost twice as fast. It's getting warmer in Russia. The fastest temperature increase has been in the Taimyr Peninsula, Russia's largest peninsula, located in the far north, which forms the northernmost part of the Eurasian mainland, he said. Over the past 10 years, the average temperature there has risen by 0.8 Celsius or 0.14 Fahrenheit to 1.2 Celsius or 2.1 Fahrenheit, he said. So the average annual temperature in the Taimyr Peninsula up in northern Russia has been increasing 2.5 to 2.8 times faster than the global average. And scientists expect this trend to continue, according to Simonov. Well, okay, now this is really not making any sense. Let me take a look at the globe and see just where that is. Okay. So, the North Pole is, all right, so there's the North Pole. Now, that supposedly hasn't changed. You notice then that this North Pole is just north of Greenland and this Banff or whatever area. Okay, but they're claiming it's moving towards Russia, towards this area right here. Let's see if that is that spot that they're talking about. Okay, so there's the Taimyr Peninsula. Boy, they got Taimyrs everywhere up there, but we get the point. It's right about there. This is the most northern region of Russia, and it's getting warmer there. But this magnetic pole is going in that actual direction. This drifting of the magnetic pole over the last 100 years or whatever it's been has been going in that direction. So if the center of that area would be the coldest spot, then why is there no ice cap where they claim the North Pole is? So perhaps it's not actually colder at the North Pole. It's actually warmer at the North Pole. There is no ice, and it's actually the coldest down here in Greenland, where all the snow is. If you look at Russia, you don't see all that snow. You see the snow going into the islands there around Canada and some of the islands offshore from Russia. All around that North Pole point, there's ice all around it. There's even ice up here in the Rocky Mountain area because that's high elevation. But there's no snow right there at the North Pole. So if the North Pole is actually moving towards Russia, then perhaps that's why it's actually getting warmer there. But it would also mean that if the North Pole was there, then opposite of it would be warmer, which might actually be Canada. See, it would maybe mean it would be getting warmer in that area. But over here in New England, it might be getting a little colder because that's still, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you look at Europe, then it would make sense that Europe would be getting a little colder because it's outside of that ring of warmth that's around the North Pole. I read a story about a man named Robert, I think his name is Hansen, who did an expedition up there, like with dog sleds and, a dog team, and all these people that were going up. They didn't go up there by airplane or anything. I think they had boats, and then they ended up not being able to go any further due to the ice, and then somehow they broke through, and then there was no more ice in the water. When they got nearer to the North Pole, there was no more ice. And I remember reading about that, and they just put that as a little side note. There's no ice at the North Pole, and nobody knows why. It seems like it gets warmer. Well, that would tend to, people had a heyday. A lot of these Hollow Earth people have a heyday with that. But what I'm getting at is that it wouldn't necessarily mean, just because it's getting warmer in Russia, doesn't necessarily mean that the pole's not going that direction. It certainly is getting warmer here, but we're far, far away from the North Pole here in America, and it's getting warmer. So let's ask the question, is it getting warmer or colder in perhaps this area around Kazakhstan, I guess, area? Let's just see if Kazakhstan's getting warmer or colder. And it says, no, Kazakhstan is not getting colder in recent years. On the contrary, data shows that the country is experiencing a warming trend, with average temperatures increasing significantly over the past few decades, making it one of the regions most impacted by climate change. Rising temperatures. From 1950 to 2020, average air temperature in Kazakhstan has increased at a rate of 0.31 Celsius per decade. Based on measurements from 110 weather stations, the most pronounced temperature rise occurred during the last 2 decades, while no significant trends in precipitation were observed. So it looks like my theory doesn't really hold water. It seems like everywhere in the world is getting warmer, according to these guys. However, I'm still not convinced, because I've been hearing, I don't know how many years in a row I've been hearing it's getting colder in the Northeast in America and in London area in Europe. So I'm going to ask another question here. So I wrote, is Spain getting colder? It says, no, Spain is not getting colder. In recent years, on the contrary, data shows that Spain is experiencing a warming trend. So 3 degrees Celsius in the last 50 years. So then I asked, is Sweden getting colder? And it says no. Sweden is not getting colder in recent years. Average annual temperature increasing by nearly 2 degrees Celsius since the late 19th century. So it looks like across the board, the whole northern hemisphere is getting warmer. And lastly, I asked, is New England getting colder, which is the area around Maine and New Jersey, New Hampshire, and up there in even Virginia area, the Northeast area. And they said, no, New England is not getting colder in recent years. On the contrary, data shows that New England is experiencing warming temperatures, particularly during winter, due to climate change, with average annual temperatures rising significantly over the past decade. Well, I've got one more thing I want to ask. What the average temperature in Virginia was over the last 20 years. And it did go back and forth since like 1895. There were years where it got colder, but it says that from 1955 to 1984, the values were below average. It did get colder up to 1984. But then it says the most recent decades was the nation's warmest on record. So unless they're lying to me, this year and I think it was a couple, 3 years ago, I've heard this over and over again where it was really cold back there, back east. Unless they're lying to me, that was an anomaly. It wasn't something that's been going on every year. I finally said, okay, is anywhere on Earth getting colder? And AI says, well, the Earth as a whole is warming due to climate change. Some specific regions, like parts of East Antarctica, we'll look on the map to see where that's at exactly, are experiencing slight cooling trends in recent years, although the overall trend is still warming across most of the planet. This can be attributed to complex regional weather patterns. So the bottom of the world down there in the Antarctic might be getting colder in some places. Now, I wonder why that is. But let me look on the map here. Let's go down to, let's find East Antarctic. So the only way I would know how to find the East is if you looked up here, and this is the West in North America, and the East is China. So we go straight down, we would say on the right would be the eastern part of. So this area right here would be getting colder. Now, let's go back up. If this North Pole is going in this direction, it's moving, this way towards Russia, then if we go all the way around to Antarctica, that's exactly the eastern side of Antarctica that's getting colder. So, if this area right there on the eastern side is getting colder, then it could be that it's getting colder in Australia, or maybe it could be that it's getting colder out here in the ocean and we don't know because nobody lives out there. Let me see if this island is getting any colder. What is this island? The French Southern and Antarctic lands. And I didn't think they'd have it, but it says no. According to current climate data, the French Antarctic southern lands are not getting colder in recent years. Instead, most research indicates that the Antarctic Peninsula, where the French southern and Antarctic lands are located, is experiencing significant warming. Now, hold on. Didn't you just say that this region of Antarctica with the east, let me go back and see if that's correct. Where's the east? That would be the eastern side right here, right? And off the coast of the eastern side is this this island. So, I mean, let's ask if Australia's getting any colder. I think it's getting warmer there because they've had a lot of fires. And it says, no, Australia's not getting colder in recent years. On the contrary, it's demonstratively getting warmer, with the average temperature increasing by around 1.5 Celsius since the national records began in 1910, indicating a significant warming trend across the country. The oceans around Australia have also warmed significantly by around 1 Celsius since 1910. Now, since I couldn't leave it there, I went to Quora, where the dumb people live, and they usually have better answers than AI. They asked on Quora, is there any place in the world where the average temperature is getting colder in the past decade, despite the trend of global warming? And then they're talking about currently a cooling trend on Earth. If so, what could be causing this trend despite the ongoing issue of global warming? Good question, and good for you. I believe you are seeing and feeling what so many are unable to see. I believe there is a cooling trend. Okay, so, all right, you can believe that all you want, but do you have any evidence? The mumbo jumbo here, and I go down to some charts, and I see where it says, whether it be a warming cycle or a cooling cycle, Professor Dilly believes all cycles begin at the poles. In 2022, the Arctic, not the Antarctic, but the Arctic, had the coldest spring and summer on record. And in 2021, the Antarctic had the coldest winter on record, from Professor Dilly. So, that's like back and forth, first it's the Arctic, then it's the Antarctic. But why would it be getting colder in 2022 if it's a warming trend? And is that true? Can we trust anybody? Not only are the hot temperatures of 2023 exaggerated and or false, we actually had record-breaking cold temperatures completely ignored by the IPCC and the media. Now that makes sense because, like I said, I have been hearing about all the cold weather for the last several years in the northeast region of the United States and in Britain and Europe. But then you look it up, as we did, and they're saying, no, it's getting way warmer. Now I'm beginning to think that maybe they're just lying like NASA. So it says, keep in mind, the atmosphere is comprised of two air masses, cold polar air, warm tropical air. When they meet at the polar front, strong winds blow along the front in upper atmosphere. This is known as the circumpolar vortex and includes Rossby waves, large horizontal atmospheric undulation that is associated with the polar front jet stream and separates cold polar air from warm tropical air. When the Earth cyclically warms, the warm pattern pretty much remains zonal. When the Earth cyclically cools, the polar front moves further to the equator, and the wave pattern switches from zonal to meridional. I don't know what that means, but what the nutty true believer do in their distorted minds is convince themselves wave patterns switching from zonal to meridional is all due to the catastrophic heating of the tropical air on the Earth. The warm air causes a surge where all that cold air heads south, and the reason why some places get colder than others, and of course why we still have snow. Oh, so 2023, January 14th, an astonishing minus 62.4 Celsius were recorded in Tonglulak, Siberia, breaking the all-time station record. So that's 2023. It's colder. February 4th, the Halifax Airport in Nova Scotia saw its coldest wind chills ever recorded. 43 Celsius. This tops its previous record of 41. That was set in February 13th, 1967 for wind chill. February 5th, Boston officials closed down the public school system due to the impending freeze. The low temperature hit minus 23 Celsius. shattering the day's record set more than a century ago. February 5th, Providence, Rhode Island. The mercury dropped to minus 23 Celsius, minus 9 Fahrenheit, well below the previous all-time low of minus 19, set in 1918. February 5th, National Weather Services in Caribou, Maine said it received reports of frost quakes, sudden cracks in frozen soil or underground water when it's very cold. The National Weather Service office reported a wind chill of minus 51 degrees Celsius in the little village of Frenchville, just south of Canadian border. February 7th, the summit of Mount Washington in New Hampshire reported a wind chill low of negative 78 Celsius and negative 108 Fahrenheit. The coldest temperature ever recorded in the United States of America. February 19th, temperatures in Shepherd Bay, Nunavut, dropped to negative 49.6 Celsius, negative 57.3 Fahrenheit. March 7th. And remember, this is all 2023, right? So March 7th, the United Kingdom braved its coldest night when temperatures plunged below negative 15 Celsius in several regions. Now, keep in mind, we haven't heard a word about anything getting colder in the western half of the United States or in China or Japan or anything. It's all been right there around Russia, Europe, and North New England, which is exactly the direction that supposed magnetic pole's moving. So we were probably right the first time, but they're just messing with the figures. May 5th, Antarctica, extreme cold arrived abnormally early when temperatures dropped to below negative 75 Celsius. Beginning in May, following the onset of polar night, winter has started at the South Pole and with it glacial cold at the Russian research station at Vostok. As early as May 5th, 2023, a low of negative 75 Celsius was recorded. Days later, this fell further to negative 76.4 Celsius. This marks a new record for the early winter. Daily highs are also plummeting, often just below negative 70 Celsius on Earth's coldest continent. So they're just lying to us. Just straight up, bam, sticking it right up the old back end and working it in and out till it hurts. And I'm telling you, that's what I think's going on. I believe Quora more than I would believe AI. AI's a liar. Now tell me that a computer with no consciousness, with no awareness could lie to you. Knowing, I guess they could program it to lie about some things. But how do you program a computer to lie? It's obviously being run off of our own subconscious, and they're implanting this information, and they're manipulating all of the data. I believe well, for one thing, we have more thermometers placed in new places. The world population's grown. People are living all over the place and reporting more. So they're getting more accurate temperatures. Maybe they just didn't get any reports 20, 30 years ago like they're getting now. But why is it all trending to be the opposite of what it actually is? I think they're just lying. So June 5th, a weather station in Lapland, Ekontekio, Klippasjärvi, Sanna, reached negative 7.7 Celsius. This may not seem that cold for northern Finland, where winter temperatures reach as low as negative 51.5. However, the last time Lapland saw a minimum temperature of negative 7 Celsius in June was on June 3rd, 1962. So, yeah, not only are they lying, but we can also glean from this that the areas getting colder is the area where Europe and Russia is and the eastern part of the United States, but not the western part. Not the far eastern part of Asia, but just this area where New England is in America and the actual England and that side of, I guess, western, northern Russia is getting colder. But perhaps Japan's getting warmer along with Alaska and Canada. They haven't mentioned it getting colder in Japan. June 22nd, Sydney experienced its coldest morning on record, recording a temperature of 1.8 Celsius. at Olympic Park. Oh, but they're having all these fires because of the global warming. Well, maybe they're starting the fires. Because notice that well, if it's getting colder in Australia, then they should not have as many fires. So they're probably just starting the fires. But it says, in fact, more than 100 weather stations across Australia registered their coldest May minimum temperatures on record. They saw regular frost, snowfall, and below average rainfall. So, there are places where the average temperature is rising and the maximum temperature has fallen slightly too. But that is only the symptoms of a rise in a greenhouse gas. That's what they're telling you to believe. And it says, what is the average temperature on Earth? Has it been getting colder or warmer? There is no average temperature. It would be meaningless if you did calculate something. Let's say we measure the North Pole and the South Pole and somewhere in Africa and somewhere in UK. What would that figure tell us? To be useful, it would need to tell you something global. But weather is chaotically random within the confines of weather systems they arrive in. There are techniques used to produce figures, but that is all they are, techniques. The concept that the planet is warming is a popular and an accurate could well be true, but as an average, it's pretty irrelevant and open to some pretty egregious manipulation too. We can tell the planet is getting warmer from other techniques, though. We know it's warmer than the Ice Age, right? Yeah, 57 billion years ago? Yeah, it might be. We know it's almost 25 degrees cooler than other periods. There were no thermometers 10,000 years ago. Well, there were, but not common. So how do we know these things? How do we know it's getting warmer or colder? Right? Oh, I guess geological scientific farcism, right? Lately is not a meaningful time frame. It's not going to get noticeably warmer, and I would add within the next 10 years, if we're talking about geological time being billions of years. It would be meaningless to say, I mean, if the world's really getting warmer by 2 or 3 degrees in a matter of 20 years, then we got some serious problems coming. Because that means in just a mere 500 years, we're all going to be dead. Okay? And if it does go down, it's going to go back up. There's cycles. But we wouldn't know because we couldn't tell you what the temperature was 7,000, 10,000 years ago because nobody was on the earth recording the temperatures. But anyway, all of this is just ridiculous. My point here is we can't come to any actual scientific proof of what the earth is doing. But my own little temperature clock in my own body says, I can tell you it's been getting warmer in the western part of the United States. It's been getting warmer, there's less snow. But I have also seen there is more snow and getting colder in the Northeast and in Europe. And evidently up in Siberia. And that's all I got to say about that. So, I'm going to go get this uploaded. Guys, I hope you have a wonderful evening. The Lord will bless you. May His grace and peace be with you all. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.